So I'm funnier the more coffee that you guys drink. So I feel like coffee and I have the same job this morning to, wake us all up. So I'll take it. So a little bit about me. I feel like this is like a homecoming. It's like, kind of like going to your high school reunion, but like instead of seeing like, your teachers, I see my old boss, old bosses, old colleagues. So it's kind of cool. So my background is in loss prevention. I started in loss prevention at Target, but a long time ago. So while I was at Target, I learned empathy. And when I learned empathy, I learned it because of interviewing techniques. How many of us have sat across from someone and done an interview for theft, right? A lot of us have done that. And so that's what I mean when I say LP knows empathy. And I remember when I was learning this technique, this interviewing technique, I didn't understand why I had to learn this monologue. I was like, why can't we all just watch this video together? That sounds like more fun to me. Let's watch season 1, 2, and 3 of you stealing some stuff. Why can't we do that? I thought hit and play together, okay, and here I could narrate and everything. It would be great. And yeah, thank goodness my boss was like, yeah, you're not doing that. Not how we do it. And I remember the first conversation that I had with someone. They're fired and then they're arrested and then they're walking out the door and they said, thank you. And I was like, what am I supposed to say to that? Let's do it again sometime? I didn't know what to say and I got defensive, but then it kept happening over and over again. And I realized that people were not thanking me for the opportunity to be fired and arrested in the same day. It's not what that was about. They were thanking me because of how they were treated. So then I understood why we didn't just hit play on that video. Got it. It kept happening over and over again. People kept thanking me as they were leaving in handcuffs and just got fired over and over again. And I know you guys have had that experience. How many of you guys have had someone thank you after you fired and arrested them? Right? Is it weird for you the first time as it was for me? What do you say? You're welcome. That's all I need to say. So after Target, I went to Ralph Lauren, and Ralph Lauren sent me to my first WZ class. And I was like, dude, this is awesome. And then Ralph Lauren eliminated my position. They were like, just kidding. And I was like, okay. So I sent an email to my WZ instructor, Wayne. I was like, hey, do you know anyone out there hiring? And he was like, we are. And I was like, cool. And he was like, yay. So that's how it went. There was a thumbs up emoji in there too. So while I was at WZ, I learned so much about communication, about empathy, about storytelling, and that's really how we build trust. That's how we build trust. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the science behind trust. I'm going to talk about our brain on trust. It's not like one of those egg videos like your brain on drugs. It's not like that. I'm going to talk about our brain and trust. I'm going to talk about shame and empathy. And what's amazing about what we're going to talk about today is most of us already know this stuff. I'm just going to put science behind what we already know is working for us. Because the same things that make us good interviewers is what makes us good leaders, right? Humility, integrity, being able to listen to someone, being able to sit with someone in a really difficult situation and lead them through that process and help them realize it is going to be okay. All right, so I believe trust is essential to an empathic workplace culture. It's essential to move a workplace forward because teams that don't trust their companies waste cognitive resources watching their back instead of being present with the company. Think about that. That's not where we want their cognitive resources, right? We don't want them watching their back. We want them focused on innovation and on change and on working together. So one of the things about trust is that I can't just sit here and tell you guys, hey, trust me. It's not something to do with words. Trust is something to do with actions. And it's rarely a grand gesture that makes trust happen. Trust is built in little moments, little teeny tiny moments that are built over time. Like I said, I can't just say, trust me, and we're good. Trust is continuing to move towards someone and connect with someone instead of constantly pushing them away. And this applies in our personal lives, in relationships, and at work. So think about, like, if your kid's like, hey, I gotta talk to you, and you're like, yeah, in a minute, I gotta like finish this Candy Crush game. You know, if your significant other's like, hey, you know, I gotta talk to you about something, and you're like, definitely no. You know, if someone's knocking on your door at work, and you're like, I gotta talk to you, and you're like, yeah, for sure, it's not happening right now. Those constant moments of pushing someone away, that erodes trust. The more that we choose to engage, and I get it, there's times when like we're so not in the mood to deal with some stuff, right? Like, you know, your kid comes home and they're like, you know, this very trivial thing happened to me, and you're like, I don't know if we're gonna pay the mortgage this month, right? We are worried about such big things, but to them, that's their world. And this is how we build trust over and over and over again, in these little teeny tiny moments. And it's the same thing at work. Someone knocks on your door, someone comes to you with an issue. This is where we build trust. Brene Brown is like my hero. She talks about, Brene Brown fans in here? Okay, let me turn you all, Brene Brown fans. Okay, so she uses this analogy called the marble jar. While her daughter was in elementary school, the teacher had this marble jar. And every time the class collectively made good decisions, the teacher would put marbles in the marble jar, and once it got full, the class had like a party or something. So when the class collectively made bad decisions, which was usually like a substitute teacher came, that was usually collectively like bad decisions got made. You guys all remember substitutes, right? It was like, it's gonna be fun. So marbles would come out of the jar, and that's how trust works. The more that we connect, the more that we listen, the more that we move to understand someone else, that's marbles in the marble jar. And the more we push someone away, the more that erodes. And so I know in loss prevention, one thing comes to mind with me with trust, and that was the way that I handled terminations for someone who was stealing. And I remember wanting to make sure that people who were just fired got to leave with dignity and got to leave with respect. And I gotta tell you, it was very selfish of me to do that because I mostly just didn't want anything to happen to my car. It was mostly that, okay? It's fine. I was mostly worried about that. Because like they knew what I drove, they could see me in the parking lot, right? And so I would always have, when the police would show up, I would have them park outside the employee entrance. I would like close off the whole back thing, and I would make sure that they could leave with dignity. And I did this over and over again. People were like, why can't I come back there? Fine. And then one day, I had a brand new officer, and I was very lucky because I used to work for the police department that was in the township where I worked at Target. And so a new officer started, and so he parks out front and as far away from the employee entrance as he possibly could. And so I tell him, can you please not take this employee out the front door? And he was like, yeah, my car's parked out front. I'm like, I got that part of this. But I don't want that to happen, because dignity and trust and respect. And he was like, I don't care, park out front. And I remember, and he did, he walked that employee out the front door, and the feeling in that store sunk. It sunk. I broke their trust, is what I did. I broke their trust. So the next day, we're all together, and I could still feel it. And so instead of just not saying anything, I wanted to say something. I wanted to bring it up. So I told them, that's not what I wanted yesterday. He parked out front, and I was like, can you please come to the side door? And like, have you ever tried to tell a cop what to do? Doesn't always go well. So I said, you've never seen me do that before. I will do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I'm sorry that's how that went. And I could feel that anxiety dissipate. And so the only reason that they believed me, the only reason I could say, hey, trust me again, please, is because I had marbles in the marble jar. Because I had demonstrated over and over again that this is who I am. If my actions do not match what I say I am, it doesn't work. So our customers trust us too, right? They have expectations of us. They trust that we're going to walk into a safe and secure environment. Our employees trust that they're going to be safe and secure at work. And we build those over everyday moments. So if something does go wrong, we're able to say, trust us again. That's really what we want to have happen. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the science of empathy. Yay. Okay, so I'm not going to go too deep into neuroscience because I'm in a social, talking career. If I knew how to do math and brain stuff, I wouldn't have this job. So we're going to keep it high level, right? So we all have there's 3 sections of our brain. We have our limbic brain, that's our animal brain. Our animal brain is what handles all of the functions. That's where, we breathe. Can you imagine if we had to remind ourselves to breathe and heartbeat and all right, I got to cut and we need some platelets to descend, thank you. This is the part that takes care of our living. That's our animal brain. Keeps us alive. The next layer of our brain is our limbic brain. Our limbic brain is our emotional brain. That's where all of the feelings on the feeling wheel that your therapist showed you. Oh, just my therapist showed me that? Okay, that's fine. All of the feelings and emotions that we have are in our limbic brain. Our limbic brain does not have capacity for language. So words and feelings don't come from the same part of the brain, which makes sense. Have you ever had a new person start at work and they walk in and you're like, I don't like them? It could be the opposite. They could be like, I really like that person. And someone's like, well, why? Why don't you like him? And you're like, I don't know, I just don't like him. Or have you ever had one of your children bring home a new significant other? And you're like, don't like him. That resonated more, okay. And we're not always able to put words to it. And the reason we're not able to put words to it is that's not the part of the brain that language comes from. Our limbic brain, our feeling brain, that is where trust comes from. That is where loyalty comes from. That is the part of the brain that decides, I like you, I trust you, I will follow you. So, our neocortex, that's our most recent part of the brain, that's the outside squishy part that we're all familiar with seeing. That is our rational brain. That is the part of the brain that language comes from, that's the part of the brain that does math. That's the part of the brain that puts words to things and rationalizes things for us. So when we want to connect with someone, we need to demonstrate that to the limbic brain. And you can't just be like, hey, if I can talk to your limbic brain real quick, that'd be great. We talk to the limbic brain with our actions and by telling stories. So before I get to that part, I want to talk a little bit about shame. Just kidding, shame. I want to talk about shame. And you guys have heard that you can go 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, and 3 months without another human being. You guys have heard that before? Yeah. Okay. This is the part where you participate. Nod, smile. Thank you. All right, cool. I got some thumbs up. That's awesome. Appreciate that. All right, so we are literally neurobiologically, we need connection. We need other people. Right? We need other people like we need food and like we need water. And that's the reason that solitary confinement is torture. And some people are like, that sounds amazing. Solitary confinement, are you kidding me? Just in a room by myself where no one needs anything or talks to me, you're gonna take my phone, right? Sounds awesome. If that is you, just use your vacation time. Just go ahead, submit that now. If you wanna pull your phone out, it's fine. Submit your vacation time now. It won't take very long until we're lonely. So the opposite feeling of, we don't have water is dying of thirst. And some of you may have experienced that as a hangover. I'm not saying today, I'm just saying you may have experienced that in your life as a hangover. It doesn't feel good, right? If you haven't eaten all day, there's a reason they call it hangry, right? That doesn't feel good. And the opposite of connection is shame. It doesn't feel good. Shame is that thing inside of us where we feel like if someone finds something out about us, that they're not going to think we are worthy of connection. And that could feel like if someone finds this out about me, they're not going to love me, they're not going to hire me, they're not going to promote me, they're not going to sit with me at lunch. We all know that feeling, right? It doesn't feel good. It feels even icky when I say it. You're like, oh my gosh, please talk about something else. In a minute, I will. So, shame is that feeling that there's something about us, if someone finds out, that they're not going to want to connect with us. And that's why that feels so terrible. The way to make shame worse, so don't do this. This isn't like a how-to on how to make shame worse. The way to make shame worse is through silence, secrecy, and judgment. So let me give you an example. Let's say someone comes into your office and they walk in, they close the door, and they sit down, which is usually not a good sign. Like, usually not, like, this is going to be great. And they say something vulnerable to you. They say something like, I'm gay. Here's how to make that worse. Silence. It feels icky in here right now, doesn't it? You don't like it. I don't like it. That's shame. All right, so silence, that's one way to make it worse. Another way to make it worse is secrecy. Imagine saying, don't tell anyone else that you said that to me after you leave this office. Right? I don't like how it feels in here right now either. That's shame. Silence, secrecy makes it worse. Judgment makes it worse. Ew, you are? Right? You guys are like super uncomfortable, and so am I. And I'd rather have you feel that and experience that it really does make it worse. And this is like a hypothetical. So now let's think about it in terms of someone messes up. They walk in your office, they close the door, and they're like, I messed up the thing. You sit there in silence. You're like, don't leave here and tell anyone else that. They're like, you did? So these vulnerable moments, there's a way to make this better. The antidote to shame is empathy. The way to make this go away is empathy. The most powerful words in struggle is me too. I get it. There's a reason that was a movement. All right, and I usually say, anyone who has ever lost a parent, for example, knows the most powerful words that you heard those first couple weeks is me too, I've been there. Anyone who has a family member that's an addict knows. When you meet someone else who has gone through that, it's very powerful. It's very powerful. Now, I realize you're not always going to be able to say me too. Like, I am never going to be able to tell a friend going through a divorce that I get it. Because I have never been through a divorce, because I have never been through marriage, because I heard it is the leading cause of divorce. So I'm just getting ahead of that. It's just getting ahead of that. But I have friends who have gone through difficult divorces. So I might not be able to say yeah, me too, I get that. But I can find that place inside of me that resonates with the emotions that they are going through. Emotions are universal, and unless you are a psychopath, you understand emotions. And some of you were like, no, I'd rather opt for psychopath. Fine, I'm not going to judge, right? I don't do that. I don't judge. But it's okay to say that you understand emotions, that you have emotions. The antidote to shame is empathy, but we can't just say to someone, I understand. Have you ever had that happen? You're like, no, you don't. Someone's like, oh, I totally get what you're going through. And you're like, how? And they're like, I just didn't know what else to say. You're like, well, that's not cool. So we demonstrate empathy. We can't just say, I understand, and have that work. We demonstrate empathy by telling a story. And so any of you who have ever sat across from someone and told a rationalization or given a theme for a theft conversation knows that that works, knows that telling a story works. And the reason that a story works is that when we tell someone a story, their bodies release cortisol and oxytocin. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It's not awesome. Also causes belly fat. I'm just saying. I'd want someone to tell me, okay? Cortisol is a stress hormone. Oxytocin is a feel-good hormone. It's like an empathy cocktail. Right? Now, no, you cannot drink an empathy cocktail. You cannot. You drink any other kind of cocktail you want. I don't care. You can have it for breakfast. I don't care. But when we tell our stories, their bodies prepare us to feel with that story. So why is shame important to you guys? Shame is highly correlated with addiction, eating disorders. It's highly correlated with depression, suicide. It's highly correlated with violence, bullying, aggressive behavior. And I feel like those last three things matter to you guys a whole lot when it comes to work. Am I wrong? Am I right about that? My thumbs up emojis, thank you. So, remember, the antidote to this shame feeling is empathy. So we have to be able to tell our stories. There's also a thing called mirror neurons. I learned about mirror neurons during a CEU event. There was a dance movement therapist teaching a whole bunch of us about movement therapy. That's the other side of the business that I do, is the improv therapy group. And so she's like, all right, I need 3 volunteers. And I was stupid. And I was like, I'll volunteer first, right? That's not always a great move. And so she's demonstrating mirror neurons by telling me dance moves to do. She's like, and words like, I don't know what like drop, left, back, like I never did Dance Dance Revolution or like any type of dance. So I was like really trying hard because, you know, I want to do well for her example. So I'm like trying to do it. While I'm doing that and she's telling me what to do, she's demonstrating opposite stuff. And I was like, dude, that's not cool. And then after the example, she's like, you failed. I was like, great, good luck getting another volunteer. She asks for another volunteer. This time, all she does is say the dance moves to do. She doesn't mess this person up. She's like, still not good. She's like, can I have a 3rd volunteer? I'm like, how is anyone gonna say yes at this point? Someone else says yes. And this time, she demonstrates the dance move and does it at the same time. And of course, this person was like, yay, did it right. So our mirror neurons help us to do what someone is telling us to do. So what's important for us as leaders is to demonstrate the actions that we want represented in the people that work for us that's represented in our organizations. We can't just say, hey, be like this, but I'm gonna do something different. It's real confusing. And mirror neurons is the reason that doesn't work. All right. I spoke at an HR event back in June, and they said to me, they're like, 2 rules. 1, don't curse from the stage. And I was like, ooh, okay. I will do my best. Have you met me yet? Like, oh, okay. And the second rule was, one of the things that I say often is the way that we treat someone on their last day of work could be the difference between whether or not they come back shooting. And they were like, don't say that on stage. And I was like, I mean, I feel like it's kind of an important message. Isn't that like the thing that we're trying to avoid? Yeah. And she told me that it was too soon for an HR VP that was in the audience. And I was like, fine, I will use the word workplace conflict instead, like violence was still too soon. And I get it. And I feel a lot safer saying that in this room, because I feel like in this room, you're like, well, duh. Like, no kidding. The way that we treat people in these vulnerable, difficult moments, their self-worth is on the line. And the way that we handle these could be the difference between a workplace violence incident and no paperwork. I don't know about you guys, but paperwork's not my most favorite part about my job. If it is for you, I have some contract work for you. Seriously though. So I mentioned that shame is highly correlated with bullying, with violence, with aggressive behavior. So how do we know if we have a workplace culture that is a shame-based culture? Is bullying a common event? Are people complaining about bullying? Another sign of a workplace culture that is shame-prone is people are afraid to speak up. People are afraid to mess up. If people feel safe coming to you and saying, I messed up, that's a really great sign. It's a really good sign. Sometimes of an individual that is deep in shame, that's again someone who's not likely going to speak up, someone who does a lot of blaming. If you have a culture of blame, people don't want to take accountability, it doesn't feel safe. Those are the types of environments where there's a lot of infighting, there's like meetings after the meetings. If you're not getting invited to the meeting after the meeting, that's also not a good sign. I don't know if you want to get invited to that meeting, like that could be a terrible meeting, but just the fact that those are happening is usually not a good sign. We have to create a safe place for people to tell their story. And it is not easy. It is not easy to sit across from someone and say, hey, I know what it's like to totally mess up too, but it's the most connecting thing that can happen, especially coming from someone that's your leader. So another story, I remember I was making a training video and I was like, cool, I'm gonna have this training video done on this day. And then the person who was like in the training video with me was like, oh, I didn't like get my hair done, like I've got roots, and like I don't have the right makeup on, I want to wear a different outfit, and like I have empathy for that. I was like, oh, I get it, we can do it a different day. And one of my bosses like legit yelled, and I was like, ooh. I was like, no, so I guess we can do it today. And I remember I was like so upset that this person like yelled at me. And I remember going into the office of another supervisor, and he was like, oh, I've been on the other end of that, that doesn't feel good. And just that like little moment of like, me too, I've been there, completely dissipated the shame that I felt about, wow, there's something about me that someone had to yell at me. And it completely dissipated it, and we could get back to what the actual issue was, which was getting this training video finished. So when you can share with someone a story that demonstrates you understand, that's the most connecting thing that you can do. And I know that you know that it works, because you've used rationalizations and you've used themes and you've told these stories and had people feel comfortable telling you about wrongdoing. All we're doing is transferring those same principles to our leadership conversations. I believe that workplace culture is built in everyday moments, and it's tested during the difficult ones. Our workplace culture is built little by little, and it can be destroyed in an instant. But if we have built enough trust in our organizations, when something bad happens, they will trust that we will get through it together. They'll trust that we'll get through it together. I believe in an empathy-first approach to everything, because it's people that get our jobs done. I realize that there's a lot more AI, but like someone's got to operate that too. You know, there's people buying the stuff that we all the stuff that we saw in that lab. Not stealing people have to do that too. Regular customers have to use that stuff too. And having empathy in those moments. So when we are making policies, when we are writing procedures, when we are changing our culture, when we are merging departments, when we are merging companies, these are all moments where taking an empathy-first approach is going to make a huge difference. An empathic culture is a culture where people have each other's backs instead of watching their own back. An empathic workplace culture embraces imperfection and knows that there's going to be conflict. I mean, even in my own company, there's like not that many of us. And to think that there's never going to be conflict, like ever, is a ridiculous thing. It's how do we work through it? And we focus on our values. We focus on what we believe, who we are. And we use that as guideposts to get us through those difficult moments. Empathy is also the key, and I don't really like using the term millennial because I am one. And just to throw this out there, millennials are turning 40. I'm 39 for one more day. I know, I turn 40 tomorrow. I can't tell enough people that I'm 39. Can't tell enough people. The key to marketing to millennials is empathy. That's what millennials want. I'm on the cusp. I feel like I'm on the cusp. I'll take it. Connection and purpose is what we want, and it makes sense. It makes sense that connection and purpose is what we want because neurobiologically, remember, that's why we're here. We need that. We need empathy and connection like we need water and air. It is okay to have it at work. If we tell people, you know, hey, tell us what's going on, and they tell you what's going on, and you're like, oh, don't bring that to work. I'm like, what'd you ask me for then? So we need a safe place for people, and you're that safe place. You are the safe place for people. As leaders of your organization, that's the safe place. That's the safe place. Okay, feel free to add me to your email lists, because I know that's what's coming. So I want to leave you with one last thing. Struggle is going to happen in our lives. Struggle is going to happen in our lives. If you have any say over the health insurance options that your company offers, make sure that the mental health options are just as good as physical health options. If you have any say, anything to do with that, making sure that, you know, if you have health insurance, right? So if someone hurts their body, they can go get that fixed. Make sure that there are options where if their emotions or their well-being or their mental health is being impacted, that they have somewhere to go to get fixed so they can come back and use their cognitive resources for you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'd like to open up the floor for any questions that you have for our speaker.
I know you guys weren't prepared to answer questions. Well, I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't on the agenda. I didn't get points in my app for having questions ready. Although if I had control, I would give you points for asking questions.
It's understandable how empathic.
Where are we?
being
I was talking to me. Oh, there we go. Okay. No, I just want to make sure I was looking at you.
the empathetic approach and how critical it is. Our managers are the direct contact for that last day of exit or that termination process. What tips can you offer for us to share with the managers when they're in that position to help them gain the empathetic skills and process that's needed?
Sure, absolutely. Reminding them that there is an after this process. So, for example, and depending on what level they are at, asking where would you like calls directed when people call? Where would you like your emails forwarded to? Where would you like any mail forwarded to? Anything forward thinking. And reminding people that we are going to have difficult situations come up. It is the way that we handle those difficult situations which define our character. We have all stared into the abyss of life and not known what to do. It's the way that we handle those moments, and that's courage. That's courage right there, is when we don't know what to do.
Speaking of courage, I have one more question.
Yeah.
I got one for you. So, the workplace that I'm in continues to get younger and younger. And as a senior leader within the organization, how do I make that workforce that's getting younger each day? You talked about it at the very end. How do I make sure they understand that my leadership to them, they can trust it?
Snapchat?
What's the best?
Don't snap. I mean, yes, Snapchat. Okay, that's not the answer.
Right.
So, do you remember what it was like for you being a brand new, 20-something in the workforce? Because I do. And I remember, so I would tell a story about what it was like for me. And that, I wasn't just always this person who I know look at now like old. The same way that I'm looking around this campus is how everyone wow, they all look so young. And I had a moment oh, that is the same perspective that they have of me as old. Anyway, I remember, my very first day 911 dispatching, and being left alone in the room. And I remember that I had a pad of paper, and I had my pens, and I had a Nextel because it was that long ago. And I had my Nokia too. And so I remember just sitting there, and I was and a cop comes up to the window, and he's what is going on? And I was nothing, I'm just ready. Well, that didn't last very long because I ended up having confidence in my job, and a couple months later, I'm on the phone and texting someone and eating a sandwich and saying hi to this person. And so we go through a process of getting better at our jobs, getting more comfortable at our jobs. Telling a story about how you got through your 20s and how you got through your first jobs. And I'm sure that in our 20s, people that are our age now thought that we were just as ridiculous and just as entitled and just as all of the things that we said. Wasn't it Socrates who was this is an entitled generation coming up after me? So that's common. That's common to not feel an understanding with, the generation or several generations that are coming after us. They have different stuff. They've always had smartphones. My friend's kids in high school has always had a smartphone. My sister's kid is 2 and knows how to hang up on me. Just saying. So is that helpful? Tell stories about when you were there and that you get it. And how you overcame it. Not terrible stories then I punched this guy and showed him who's boss. So just make sure you're proud of the end of those stories. Tell the truth. And make sure that you're telling true stories that you would like them to, emulate. You're welcome.
Great
Thank you.
question.
Great
Anyone else with a question? Angela, I have one. What's one thing I can do to be a more empathetic leader?
Demonstrate empathy. I mean, I wish I could tell you guys, all you have to do is go back and look in your handbook and change this one wording on this one page and like everything's gonna be great. But it's kind of like yoga. It's a practice. Like, I can't go to yoga for one day and be like, I do yoga now. Like, clearly there's evidence to the contrary. So empathy is a practice. You're not gonna be able to say, like, I went to this conference and I did empathy like one time, so now I'm empathic later. Right? This is a practice. It's something we have to do over and over and over again. It is hard to be vulnerable. It is really hard because we perceive vulnerability as what? Weakness. It's actually the number one measure of strength and courage. Because if it was easy, it wouldn't take courage to do it. And think about moments where you have demonstrated, or someone has demonstrated to you, it was difficult for me. That is so connecting, so connecting. Yeah, I don't know where the mics are.
Thanks for that, by the way, it was great. I was reading a book about leadership not too long ago, and I think the quote was, try to be interested versus being interesting. So the point is, as you were talking about connecting with people, if you're really trying to find out about them and being interested versus you being interesting, then they'll sort of understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, I guess, get your thoughts on that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It's a way to say, find out about someone else. You know, I mean, I think and also I want to just add about telling your story. That doesn't mean every single time someone says something to you, you're like, oh, I got a story for that, because we've all met that person. Do we like them? No. So making sure that we tell our story in moments where we feel like we need to demonstrate we get it, not every single time. So it makes sense to be interested in them. That's definitely more connecting. Yeah.
Good question, good comment. Anyone else? Well, I ask that you all join me now in a moment of empathy, and let's have another round of applause for Angela. To show our appreciation. Thank you, Angela and Nino. The next segment is brought to you by Enzyme and Master Technology Group. Good stuff.